It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And like I said, and like Vivek just said, you are the best and the brightest. And this is freaking intimidating. And I can't get this thing on. Ugh. All right. Who are we recording? Hello, NIH. So I am a behavioral scientist. Are you timing me? I'll time myself. I'm a behavioral scientist, which means that I'm used to people letting me give a whole talk and not asking any questions until the end. However, I have now lived embedded with a bunch of economists for 4 years, and I haven't gotten to a talk yet. So if you have questions in between, really, it's okay with me if you ask. Is that okay with you? Cool. Because I'm just going to speed through. This is not an even playing ground. There are some people in here that know more about health behavior theories than me. Where is that woman? And there are some people in here that have a different background. So I hope there's something of use in here for everyone. Advance the slide. It's not advancing the slide. Am I doing something stupid? Okay, let's do it this way. No, this is the one. It's this one. Yes, you're right. Okay, before I start, mHealth, mobile health, connected health, it's a village. It takes a village. And I want to thank all the members of my team, some of whom are in this room, Ben and Peja, for I couldn't do any of this without them. So this is not a single payer situation. The road to outcomes when you're trying to change behavior is through precise specification of behavior and its determinants. So I'm an obesity researcher. I'm just going to use this as an example. Obesity is like a chair that if you sit in it, it will break. And that is based on stress outcomes, sleep outcomes, exercise, and dietary behavior. So we know a little bit about obesity, but what drives those behaviors? That's something that you have to know. So you have to choose the behaviors, you have to choose your battles, and you have to know what the mechanisms of action are, the determinants that might help to change those. So what are some of the guiding principles around behavioral theory? What influences behavior? Well, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of untested, almost all untested behavioral theories. Am I right, Dave? Oh, yeah. So what are some of the things, what are some of the working ingredients? So emotions influence behavior, right? The 4 F's, which I won't go into. Cognition, what you think influences behavior. These are distinct. DiMaggio showed that. Your personal characteristics influence your behavior. Influence, for instance, women notoriously measure higher on almost all stress scales, just for starters, than men do. And people who don't consider themselves either male or female score higher on stress than in either camp, right? Social environment, your friends, your peers, your family influence all of your behaviors, influence eating and sleep, influence physical activity. Natural and built environment, what's in your refrigerator, built environment. What kind of food is available? In my research, it shows that if you live near any food, you're going to be fatter. Microscale social environment. So, the macro scale social environment. So the socioeconomic status, the policy around you, the economic structure in which you live is going to influence your health-related behaviors. Your own behavior, really depressing. What's the strongest predictor of future behavior? So freaking depressing, but yes, past behavior. You are that rat in the loop. Yes, we all are. And then there's your genes. Some genetic, how far do genes influence our behavior? There's mud fights about that right now. I won't get into it. But your metabolic health also influences your behavior, and I've proven that. So, for instance, what we showed was that young girls just entering puberty, if they entered puberty with a higher insulin resistance or less insulin sensitivity, their physical activity dropped much more sharply during that period. So your metabolic health will influence your behavior. I am not going to tell you all the different theories today, but if you'd like to know them, here's a great book. You can also get it online. This is Susan Mickey's work. Her two most important contributions, I think, is the ABC of Behavior Change Theories. It's a great book, and I think you can get it digitally now, and then you can search it, which is nice. I have a paper version that's now falling apart. And also the Behavior Change Wheel, which shows different ways of characterizing and designing behavior change interventions using all of these theories. Very useful. I'm going to give you some key terms. I know many of you know these terms, but I'm using them a little bit differently, so it's important that I go through them. So theory is, for me, Al Franken, is a formalized set of concepts. That doesn't get laughter anymore. You guys are all too young for that. Come on. All right. Formalized set of concepts organizes observations and inferences, and explains and predicts behaviors and outcomes sometimes. We hope. This is what we call a conceptual model. It's really important when you start thinking about understanding and even changing behavior, which Bonnie will get into, that you define a theory because you've got one. Don't give me that. You all have implicit theories. It is really better to get it out there on the table so that we're not all working with these secret implicit theories, because we all do. We all think we know. Being a psychologist, it's not like being an engineer. Nobody's an engineer or a computer scientist unless they can do really fancy machine learning or whatever. They've got a diploma. Everyone's a psychologist. No, you're not. You're not. So get those theories out there. Be explicit. Share them with your colleagues. Share them if you're a psychologist with your engineering colleagues. And engineering and computer science colleagues develop theories of their own, get their ideas because they're different than yours and very useful. Moving right along. A model, according to me, Al Franken, and the way that I'm going to be using it, it's an empirical, it's quantifiable, and it's a testable version of theory. That's sometimes called a mathematical or a statistical model. That's a model. The things with balls and arrows with no numbers behind it, that's a theory. We want models. So a construct is a hypothetical explanatory concept which is not directly observable, like intelligence, and a variable is what we actually measure. Some are immediately observable, some need operational definition, but these all, in our business, which you are all coming into, welcome today to our business, of behavior change, which is where we're going, we need to define the mechanism of change. So there are tons of theories and constructs out there, but if they don't directly influence the behavior of interest, they might not be useful, right? So here's a theory. This is the theory I'm going to give you today. I think there's one other one in here. This is one of my favorite theories. This is a schematic version of self-determination theory. And what it says, working pointer, oh my God, I love this university. Autonomy and control, as well as perceptions of support and choice, lead to higher perceived competence in whatever behavior we're interested in, and also lead to better self-regulation for behavior change, so better self-control. Perceived competence also influences that. And these two things then help to change behavior and maintain that behavior change. Are you guys with me? Got it. I sound like Billy. Okay. Our current theories, however, are a little bit static, and they say A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, right? What's wrong with this picture? Yeah, I'm wrong with this picture. So it's a one-way ticket from A to B. I don't know about you, but that's not what my behavior looks like. This is not how my behavior works. Let's talk about me. Actually, let's talk about chocolate. Here we go. So on the x-axis or y-axis, morning, midday, afternoon, evening. Got me? This is less on this axis, and this is more. It's okay. Are we there? We're there. All right. Chocolate consumption. Dark chocolate, please. My desire to eat chocolate changes over the time of day. I didn't have a chocolate croissant this morning, but I chocolate. You see, I'm fairly desirous already. And, through the day, it changes. Now, if I add to this model proximity of chocolate, right, and that, my desire fluctuates and the proximity of chocolate fluctuates during the day. Okay, so I really want to eat chocolate in this particular evening, and there's the bowl of chocolate which I keep in our house. It's right next to my chair. What's going to happen here? I'm so going to eat the chocolate. Yes, I am. All right. It's also influenced I'm a stress eater. That means that when I'm stressed, I won't eat anything but chocolate and drink anything but vodka, basically. So, stress, my desire to eat chocolate, and the proximity of chocolate fluctuate through the day. All different patterns, right? Yes. So here we are. Here in this particular evening, I've been teaching you guys all day, and I don't want to eat anything. I'm exhausted. I just want to die, right? But I'm a little bit stressed. And chocolate, it's on the table across the room. Am I going to eat chocolate? We're not sure, right? This is a borderline. All right, let's move on. Let's add my friend Darcy. Now, Darcy loves chocolate. So it's afternoon. I actually really want chocolate. Chocolate, however, is in the other room. Now, however, I'm feeling a little stressed. I'm sitting there going, chocolate, no chocolate, chocolate, no chocolate, chocolate, no chocolate, and Darcy drops by. What's going to happen? I am so going to eat that chocolate. So there's some new guiding principles that we have to think of, because we can now regard this. We can observe this kind of behavior and its determinants and its antecedents and its precedents in real time. So these static theories are not going to cut it, because we've got wearables, deployables, invisible, chemistry sensing, digital breadcrumbs. Do I have to explain those? Tell me now. Somebody say no. Okay, digital breadcrumbs. Your search history, everything that you do, which is recorded on your phone, everything about you, right? Your emails, your search history's already said that. You get the idea. Anything, if you're living in a smart home, we're living in a somewhat dumb home, a little bit of brains. A home with a bit of brains records a bunch of stuff about us, right? And the game changer really is smartphones. I'm not going to go over this one, but these are data hungry. This smartphone, I did my PhD. No, that's not true. I did my PhD on the first Macintosh laptop. I still have it. When I was in Amsterdam the other year, there was one in a museum I made. Like, they're really old. Yeah. This has more brain power than the computer I did my PhD, which is kind of scary, right? And it has all of these sensors, and it connects to other sensors, and it's the hub of the world. And children are getting their first smartphone in the United States of America. The sweet spot is about, how old do you think? Let's have a guess. 10. Who said 10? Yeah, you've done that research. Yeah, it's about 10 right now. In select groups, it's 7. If your father's an engineer, it's implanted at birth. These new sensing modalities allow us to think about behavior dynamically, in real time, and in context, because context is king. Context means everything, as my chocolate example showed you. That was really all about changing context in time. Time and context. All about time and context and how they combine. So key term, dynamic model. This takes into account momentary and longitudinal changes in relationships between constructs, within person fluctuations, the influence of shifting context on the user. So, for instance, I'll just throw this out. I'm not going to go over this with you, but this is an idea of a dynamic behavioral model done by my friend Eric and Rivera. There it is. Right. Huh? Yeah, there it is. Thank you. And what this basically says, think of these as tanks of water. This is a control systems dynamics model. These are like tanks of water that fill up and empty and influence the trickle-down effect. The and influence with one another. So if my self-management skills are high, I'm likely to feel more self-efficacious, et cetera, et cetera. And this can change whenever you measure stuff. So it can change as quickly as you can measure and as quickly as you can compute in remote computing. So this is, and it's a model, it's not a theory. So this is based on social cognitive theory, but it is a model because everything in there is measured and we can test the relationships and its influence on behavior. So some key questions. For me, example is going to be obesity. Key questions you're going to have to ask yourself in your groups are, which populations are we going to study? You can't have them all yet, right? Behaviors and determinants differ across populations. I don't think this is something that I need to tell you. Culture matters, socioeconomic status matters. Certainly in mobile health, which tends to be text heavy, although we're moving away from that because we're beginning to realize that we need artists in the group, which we don't have here. Because we really do need people who do that kind of artwork. You can't have life without art. Another discussion. Cognitive development matters. Health status, of course, matters. For instance, as an obesity researcher, I cannot give the same intervention to a diabetic or a pre-diabetic even as I would to somebody who's obese but otherwise healthy. Which behaviors are related to your chosen outcomes? Choose your battles. Know that where evidence directs you, choose the things that you might be able to change with the tools you have at hand. So obesity and these four, some people are really smart, can intervene on two behaviors at once. Multiple behavior change, which I think Bonnie's going to talk about. It's really hard to do something that includes all the behaviors of interest. So it's really important to choose your battle. So key question is the deeper what? Which determinants of behaviors are really related to these behaviors? So evidence-based, use the evidence base, use our best knowledge that we have, which isn't that great because it's really static, but it's a start. And I'll show you in a minute what to do with what you do after you start. All right, but your question is, does it really influence the behavior you know of? When you start thinking about theories, I know, Dave, maybe you should close your ears, but yeah, thank you. I'd say pick them apart, use the parts that are useful. And remember, we live in this larger context, right? We live in a social system. There's change mechanisms, there's health behaviors, there's outcomes, there's environment, social system, there's individual. Thank you, Bonnie. This is Bonnie's slide, which I respectfully and reverently borrowed to give you an idea that there's a bigger world out there. This is a completely unmodelable theory, right? This is the theory of everything. Mm-hmm. However, don't forget that it's out there. Key questions. Which, what, when? Paring it down. Which construct, behaviors, outcomes to intervene on? In other words, how do we understand behavior? And you start with observation. I'll show you that in a minute. What do you measure? And how do you measure them? This is a transdisciplinary collaboration. This is no longer a question of psychometrics. Psychometrics are important, but it's only one part of the key. Remember, timing, frequency, and context of measurement are going to influence what you see. Which technologies do I use? Emright is going to be talking about that. And where can you measure ubiquitously? So how can I measure things without asking people? And don't be allergic to asking people. This, as a psychologist, really gets my goat. Ubiquitous measures are important, absolutely. And people do lie, but so do ubiquitous measures because they miss how I feel. And as a human being, the only way, there is no measure for toothache, right? You have to ask. So know when to ask and know when to measure ubiquitously. If you do want on-demand or ecological momentary assessment measures, know when and where to do that and which measures to use. We don't really have any validated measures for EMA yet. So we have to, and we also have to start, I don't have time for this, but I just want to say one thing. We get all hung up in the best possible measures. Sometimes measures are good enough. There's this controversy we were talking about last night about how Fitbit, disclaimer, that was my Fitbit. All right, I'm done pulling up my shirt. Maybe. Fitbit, there's a big controversy. It turns out it's not that great of a measure. You know, Fitbit is great if you use it for the right things. We're trying to understand changes within an individual. It's fine, and it's only $30. You know, Actigraph, which is the gold standard of physical activity measurement, has its own problems. Like they still don't have a real-time interface. I still don't know if it's working when it's out in the field. Seriously? I can't believe it. And still, this is like the gold standard. The thing does some things and doesn't do other things. You know, the same with psychosocial measures. When is good enough? How much time are we going to spend spinning our wheel? Good measures are really important, but no, you know, again, choose your battles. What is this measure good for? You're always going to have trade-offs when you're using real-time data, because otherwise it's really often between participant burden and the measures that I'd like to have all the time. And believe me, I'm a data whore. I want all the data. I want it all the time. But you can't always have it all the time, so you have to choose your battles. New technologies are not magic. There's best practices in development, design, and deployment, and those are changing all the time, and hopefully you guys will help to improve all of that. You are the future. Technology can add to fundamental knowledge and behavior and vice versa, but if you don't use that fundamental knowledge and the science between it, they're just toys. And we've seen a lot of those toys being brought out. Theory and then models drive which behaviors to measure. They help with best measures. They help understand behavior and the mechanisms of change. And you have to have expertise in the specific populations, the targeting, the tailoring. And it's really important to use participatory design, which Phaedra will talk about later. Because it's all about motivating people to give us our data all the time so that we can observe their behavior. I want to know about you all the time. And if I want to know that, you have to trust me. And if you want it, they're going to trust me, I have to be trustworthy. And Camille Neberger is going to be talking about the ethical issues of that. Case studies. NOMI Networks was the first ever just-in-time adaptive intervention in kids. I'm not going to even explain that because Bonnie will do that, and then Billy will do that. But it was a real-time intervention. I intervened in real time in kids. They were wearing, it was overweight Hispanic kids, and they were wearing a heart rate monitor and carrying a phone and an accelerometer, wearing them actually. And when they were, actually, this is what the phone face looked like. This was their app that we developed in 2009, a while ago. And the basic game was, if they were sedentary for more than 2 hours after school, we would knew it, and we would start texting them. Use motivational interviewing. It was all done by hand. But the interface of knowing when they were active and what they were doing, we had that in our back pocket. And there's a paper about it. And it was effective in a small sample. But what's important for you guys is to understand how we made our choices, because it was driven by theory, common sense, and best evidence at the time. And that's what you need to drive anything. So our decision points of when to intervene was based on the evidence at the time, and we used sensors, algorithms, and time, of course, to understand that. Our tailoring variables were the child's current location and access. So we knew everything about the kid. We had GPS the heck out of them. And this was based on self-determination theory to give them a feeling of confidence. When we would text with them, we would give them, okay, I know you can't go out right now, but you've got, stairs in your home, you've got soup cans in your pantry. Use that. And this is how we did this sort of stuff. Intervention options, we used motivational interviewing, which is based on self-determination theory. You get the idea. The proximal outcome was the idea of reducing sedentary time, and that's evidence-based, right? So this is just giving you the idea of a real-time intervention and how we pulled it apart to base it on theory. But our challenges are that the theories that we're using are not up to the task. With all this data that we're getting in, what my team and I think is that we need a combination of not just machine learning and deep learning, but machine learning, deep learning, Bayesian statistics, control systems engineering, and system science models. We need to find a way to have all of these things talk to one another so that we can start using this data to build new models. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you for a moment about this new project that I'm all excited about. It's called Monitoring Family Eating Behaviors. I don't know if that was. And it's based on the idea that a system is a person is a complex system embedded in a complex system, embedded in a complex system, embedded in a complex system, etc. It's made up of all these heterogeneous elements. They interact with one another, and the interactions produce effects that are different from the effects of the individual elements, which is how we've been doing science up until now, right? And the emergent effects persist over time and adapt to changes in the system, and thus change the system often, slowly or quickly. So this is the idea of M2Fed. It's based on systems dynamics modeling, and it's an observational project using smart home technologies to understand. So this is adult one, comes home, is stressed. Does that affect child one's stress? Does stress affect eating? Do people eat faster? If I eat faster, does my child eat faster? How does this cascade through the day, and how does it maybe go back and affect the next day at the same time or at a different time? Right. So this is dynamic social networks modeling. It doesn't really exist yet, so we're working on it. And this is how we're doing it. We're using a cyber physical system going into the home. We've got smartwatches, smartphones, microphones, beacons. Everybody know what a beacon is? Did somebody say no? Great. So they're really cute. I should have brought them. The ones that we're using are called estimates. They're about this big, and they look like little geometric pieces. And what they do is they measure proximity and motion. So my beacon on my refrigerator recognizes my smartwatch, and it says to my back end, Donna's in the kitchen. Someone's in the kitchen. And if somebody else comes in with a smartwatch, it'll say someone else. If someone's in the kitchen with Donna, right? And yeah, and then it should, but doesn't quite yet because beacons have their own problems. It should say who's opening the refrigerator, but it right now only knows that if I'm alone in the kitchen. Put them on some chocolate bowl. Quiet, you. And ecological momentary assessment, I'll show you how that works, and then cloud-based computing so that we can move things along quickly. So this is based also on bits and pieces of theory all over the interwebs that have, that mimicry and synchrony define eating behavior. It's really, really interesting. I don't know how many of you have seen that research where that's from Rule Herman, and there's a video, and they bring people into their drinking lab. This is, of course, in the Netherlands where you can have a drinking lab. And college students come into the drinking lab, and they're friends, and they show, oh no, they're not friends. They all come in. It's a drinking lab. They can, have popcorn and beer and whatever popcorn. I think they give them chips and beer, really good beer, and they watch a movie. And we're watching them watch the movie. And at some point, the very attractive woman takes a sip of her drink, and you see all the guys in the house watching the movie, right? It's amazing. Synchrony. Really, really interesting. And it turns out that synchrony is a thing that happens with mood and all sorts of other stuff. So we're playing with that. And these are the other things. There's a bunch of different pieces of the system. The reason that we went for this is because I don't know about you guys, but we don't know what anybody, we don't know what people eat. Like, impossible. I don't know that we're ever going to know what people eat. People are working on it. Good for them. Even if we did know what people eat, we can't change their behavior right away by saying, you should be eating less sugar. You should be eating less chocolate. How does that work for you? Well, no. Okay, so those messages don't work so well. But what we do know is that we can change these kind of eating behaviors, like parenting styles. We can actually intervene fairly successfully, and that does have an outcome. So that's kind of the idea. And up until now, knowing that wasn't so helpful because we couldn't really measure these behaviors in real time, but we can now using smart home technologies. So we've got this signal-driven ecological momentary assessment. How much time have I got? Okay. Oh no, I've got 15 minutes because you took some of my time. All right, so we've got the signal-driven and scheduled EMA. So it's triggered by sensed mood through voice. It's triggered by sensed eating through the smartwatch. And then there's a rule-based schedule for some moods that we couldn't algorithm so well using voice. We're just using prosody. We're not using words, just prosody. And then there's a participant-reported events or moods, which you can't really rely on, but they can do that if they'd like, because it makes them feel empowered, right? So one of my major lessons in this kind of work is let people talk to you if they want to, but don't depend on it for data. Then we've got ubiquitous measures, who's in the room with the smartwatch and the beacons, the opening of cabinets, which isn't working so well, but we're working on that. Speaker identification, really hard in ambience, and certainly in family, because if my daughter picks up the phone, she's 27. I know I'm too young to have a daughter that age. She's 27. She's 27. If she picks up the phone, you think she's me. So speaker identification, knowing who's saying what so that the right person gets the prompt on the smartwatch, was a huge, a difficult task. And I'm very proud of my engineers, John Locke and Jack Stankovic, for getting that together. Length of meals, speed of eating, who's eating with you. This is all the sort of ubiquitous measures we're getting that we don't have to ask people anymore. And here's what we want to know: where, when, with whom, length of event, speed of eating, mood, hunger level. So are they eating in the absence of hunger or not? And is that influenced by stress? And is that maybe influenced by my mom's stress a half an hour ago? Stress and anxiety, prior and post activities, because we talked about that. Kitchen cabinet and refrigerator access not working so well yet. We're working on it, and we're doing concurrent activities because we're scraping their phone. So we know what they're doing on their phone, which is fine. People don't seem to mind that. They really mind if you want their words, so don't use those. The question for you guys, and the question for me guys, is what new questions can we ask this data? You can only use this data in transdisciplinary teams. You cannot use it alone. Engineers and computer scientists, I'm here to tell you, you cannot use it alone. You can try. You will come up with really weird stuff. Social scientists, you can't even begin to. Right? We can't do this alone. We need one another. And the questions are, what are the useful signals in this cabal, in this data storm? Some of the data is really accurate. Some of the data is very regular. Some of it's continuous. Some of it's crap. Some of it's not very good data at all. Some of it is only every once in a while. Some of it, like ecological momentary assessment. How often can I ask you a question? Yeah, and some of it an annual checkup. So how do we multi-level out all of this data without dumbing it down? How do we use it? And how do we develop models that personalize on the fly? Because that's really what we need. They need to be time sensitive to new data, context sensitive as it comes in. So I might skip this slide. Paige, shall I skip this slide? It's pretty exciting, right, Ben? What do you think? Try it? Okay. We're conceiving, really, thinking about a multidimensional state space, or a generalization space. A space, it's like, instead of having those graphs that you're used to, where self-efficacy explains 5% of the variance, which, I'm going to be sick all over my computer right now. This is a simple example that's so hard I almost skipped the slide. So here's the probability of behavior, any behavior, you name it. And here's your self-regulatory skill for that behavior, and here's your self-efficacy for that behavior, right? Now, if self-regulatory skills are really high, You might not need as much self-efficacy at this particular moment. Got it? If you're feeling very self-efficacious, self-regulatory skills might play a second, right? So that probability of behavior changes depending on the constellation of determinants that hopefully you're measuring at the right time, in the right way, right? So you can't think of behavior as something static. The probability, and this is really important, the probability of a behavior occurring is a small animal crawling around under a blanket. Got it? So think of a small animal crawling around under this blanket, and those peaks and valleys change depending on all sorts of stuff that I hope you're measuring. And since you can't be measuring all the stuff, I hope you've made great choices because you have a really good theoretical model that you tested. And now it is actually not theoretical anymore, but computational, right? So behavior, small animal under a blanket. I hope you've got the right blanket. So here's the idea, and here's where we're going to take off now. We're going to rocket off into Fantasyland. This is Donna's Fantasyland. Welcome to my dream. What we're starting off with, because don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and the baby is, 135 different theories that, down through the ages we've worked on, and we've got some data showing our, middelen, if lucky. But it's better than nopus. It's better, that's nothing in Dutch. It's better than having your implicit, probably not matched up in your team, idea of what drives behavior. So you start with what you got. And basically, these are cold models. These are models that are generalized just about to some population. They were all built on questionnaires to thousands of people, probably one time a measure, right? So I call that a cold model. It's seeded with the general received knowledge that we have now. What we should be doing, I think, is developing indices, using machine learning, all the sort of things that we have now at our sort of fingertips. After this training, you'll have it at your fingertips because you're going to know. Who do you call? Ghostbusters. But so it's maybe a compositive of the relevant data from similar groups, like Jewish princesses of a certain age. That these are my cognitive emotional index, and you can build a physiological index or a syndrome, and maybe a contextual behavioral index, and maybe a social community index, right? This is a cold model, and here's where you start. This gives you a somewhat accurate, good likelihood of a phenomena start. Not even good. Good start of when what drives the behavior of choice, right? But now, what we can be doing with the science that we have now at our fingertips is warming this model up with individual data. Your model can learn, right? Because we keep feeding in these various indices as we get them in real time, or in some kind of time. I see Ben's going there. Real time? Do I have to do this in real time? Can I have near time? Can I have an hour? But you decide, but you can feed this back in. So what we're hoping to do with the M2 Fed, if you guys remember my cyber-physical system, is right now it's seeded with what I think I know. But as we go, as we model, you will think of a bunch of people, bent over a piano with tools hanging out of their mouths going, is that intuitive? Does that work? This tool, no good. You can throw out self-efficacy if it's not doing anything for you in their model and plug something else in because you're testing and running that all the time, right? What if we could do that? What if we warm up our model? Then we get a much more accurate model of these are individualized models of behavior, right? As we go. Now, of course, now that I've started with warm, you probably all want hot models, right? There you go. Now, what I mean by a hot model is if you start from a cold model, you seed it with knowledge at the group level. Then we warm them up with individual knowledge, right? It's highly predictive of individual behavior, but we are a collective. What we want is that those cold models get better and better, right? So if you feed that back into the general knowledge base, the next time I start with a cold model, it's going to be much better, right? Following me? Cool. Hot models are accurate, adaptive. They are adaptively modeled dynamic individual behavior in context. I wish my glasses were a little bit better. And adaptively modeled dynamic socially networked community in context. So it goes back into the public good, and then you start the cycle all over again. That's your new cold model. So takeaways. Understanding the behavior you choose to intervene on is key. Current and emerging technologies provide the data to transform static theories of behavior, these conceptual models, into dynamic mathematical models of behavior. That's your charge. These can guide development and testing of any intervention, with the caveat, you need a theory spelled properly. Everybody see that? The queen of theory spells theory wrong on her last slide. That will guide you on deciding what, when, and how to measure in order to develop a computational model that will guide your intervention. What do I mean by understanding behavior? So, which behavior are you intervening on? What are the determinants that you're choosing to work with? Which theories are going to cover that? And like I said, bits and pieces, I'm fine with that. Which principles of behavior change or mechanisms of action do you think you need? What do you think is driving that behavior? What do you think really matters as behavior changes over the day? Because behavior changes naturally, which is why observational techniques are so interesting to me. What intervention might work for somebody, and what might work for whom in which dose? This is all stuff you need to start observationally before you can move into something that the stuff that Donna's going to be talking about. And where and when, how does time and context influence behavior? And how does that change over time? As a teenager, I was much more susceptible to context than I am now, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Now I'm just inappropriate all of the time instead of at home. Okay, call me all the time.